The gates of Ironmere had not opened for an outsider in 12 years. That was not cruelty. It was necessity, the kind that settles on a kingdom after enough has been taken from it. My father had opened those gates freely, and freely had let in the men who burned 2 of his outrider villages and rode back south laughing. I had closed them at 19, newly crowned, and I had kept them closed. My people had grain and warmth and safety. They did not have visitors. The arrangement had served us well. I tell you this so you understand the night she arrived was not supposed to happen. I was in the upper study, which is the room I use in the deep cold months because the eastern wall is all stone and holds the heat better than anywhere else in Ironmere's keep. I was reviewing the border accounts. There had been 2 avalanche-damaged supply lines that season and I was working out the rerouting, and my wolf had been restless all evening. Not agitated in the way that means danger. Restless in the way I had learned to recognize over the years as something else entirely. A low, turning attention, the way a man leans toward a sound he is not sure he heard. It had been doing this, in one form or another, for 12 years. The first time it happened I was 21 and thought I was losing my mind. I had woken in the dark with a name in my mouth, not a word I recognized, not a name from any list in my court, and my wolf had been sitting in my chest like a lantern, warm and waiting. I told no one. A Lycan king does not announce that his wolf has begun speaking names to him in his sleep. He does not say that the name sounds the way a door sounds when someone you have been waiting for finally opens it, familiar, inevitable, already known. I had carried it for 12 years. I had never found who it belonged to. My steward came to the door of the study at the 2nd hour past sunset. Aldrich, a careful man, not given to interruptions, if he was knocking, something had moved him enough to climb the tower stairs in a blizzard. I said, "Come." He entered with snow still on his shoulders from crossing the inner courtyard. He said, without preamble, "There is a woman at the gate." I set down the accounts ledger. "A woman," I said. "A pack recorder from the southern packs, my lord." Her carriage came down the wrong fork of the Ashen Crown Pass, the eastern fork, the one that runs to our gate. Her driver says the road collapsed in the storm behind them. The southern wheel is shattered. She is half frozen. He paused. The blood seal arch above the main gate has lit. There are moments that arrive quietly, the way the largest revelations do, not with thunder, but with a stillness that is louder than thunder. The world goes very precise. I noticed the exact shape of the snow on Aldrich's left shoulder. I noticed the way the fire in the study had gone lower without my watching it. "Lit," I said. "Gold, my lord, both pillars. The reaction has not been seen in any living person's memory." The blood seal arch was old, older than the keep, older than the Ironmere line. My grandfather's grandfather had set it into the gate stone when the kingdom was first sealed after the Northern Wars. It was designed to read bloodline, not to react to just anyone. The story said it would know the Lycan king's fated mate by the mark she carried, if she ever came to the gate. I had always filed that in the category of old men's hopeful embroidery. I closed the ledger and stood up. She was standing just inside the inner arch when I came down, wrapped in 2 of my gate guards' cloaks and still shivering. Her driver, an older man, frightened, stood at her shoulder. She was not frightened. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She was cold and clearly exhausted, and her dress was soaked to the knee from the snow, and she was not frightened. She was watching the keep with the quiet, assessing look of someone who keeps records for a living, who has trained herself to observe without reaction, because reaction costs you the moment and the detail. She had ink stains on her right hand, 3 fingers the outer edge of her palm. Her left wrist was wrapped in linen. Old wrappings, the kind you keep on for a long time. The fabric was worn soft, tied with a careful double knot. A birth scar, some instinct told me, or something she had been told was a birth scar. The gold light of the arch was still in the stone above her head, fading now slowly, but it had been gold. I had seen it myself coming across the courtyard. I had not imagined it. My wolf said, "That is her." And the name I had been carrying for 12 years, settled into place the way a key settles into the lock it was cut for. Not a dramatic thing. A quiet, irrevocable thing. Like recognizing a word in your own language that you heard first in a dream. I did not say any of this. "I'm a Lycan king," I said. "Who are you and where were you trying to reach?" She looked at me without flinching, which most people do not manage. "My name is Sela," she said. "I am a pack records keeper contracted to Fenward Pack. I was traveling to Coldhello to complete a secondary records audit. I am aware that I have come to Ironmere by mistake, my lord, and I apologize for the inconvenience. If you can provide shelter until the storm passes and the road is assessed, I will be grateful. If not, I understand." Delivered absolutely levelly, teeth just barely audible under it. I said, "We will provide shelter." She said, "Thank you," and that was that. I gave her the south guest room, which is the warmest in the keep, and I told Aldrich to see that she had dry clothes, a fire, and food. Then I went back to the study and sat for a long time looking at the border accounts without reading them. My wolf was not restless anymore. It had not been restless in 12 years, not truly, only turning and waiting, the way it turned and waited for something to arrive. It was still now, settled, the way a thing settles when it has found the condition it was always reaching toward. I did not go to her that night. She was a guest, and she was exhausted, and she had asked only for shelter. But I did not sleep. I sat at the study window instead, which faces east and looks out over the inner courtyard, and beyond the inner wall the gate towers. The storm had not let up. The snow was coming sideways, and the courtyard torches had been pulled inside, and there was nothing to see but the dark and the white moving through it. Somewhere in the south guest room, a woman named Sela was warm for the first time in hours, and my wolf was sitting in my chest like a thing that had at last come home from a very long journey. I thought about the arch. 300 years of standing at that gate, reading everyone who passed through, merchants, trade delegations, the occasional messenger I permitted under strict conditions, every member of my own household, and reacting to none of them. My gate captain had served for 19 years and had never seen it light. His predecessor had served for 23. There was no living memory of the arch doing what it had done tonight. I had always assumed it was a story. The way old buildings hold old stories embedded in the stone, passed down through the household, respected because respect costs nothing and dismissal might cost something, but not truly believed in the marrow. I was a practical king. I had run a practical kingdom for 12 years, and the mate bond had not found me, and I had decided, somewhere in the middle years, that it was possible to be the Lycan king of Ironmere and also simply be a man who would not have what other men had, and that this was not a tragedy, merely a condition. My wolf had disagreed. My wolf had spent 12 years murmuring a name in my sleep, with the patient insistence of a creature that was not interested in my practical conclusions. I turned the name over in my mind now. Sela. 2 syllables, soft, not the hard northern names I had grown up around, not a Coldhello name, not an Ashencrown name. A southern name, light as water, belonging to a woman who packed her own paper and crossed wrong mountain passes in blizzards with complete composure, and identified a 40-year-old clerical error while waiting for her tea. I thought about the linen on her wrist, old wrappings worn smooth with time, a birth scar she would have been told, carefully told often enough that she had never questioned it. Her uncle had been very careful about what she knew. I thought about what it meant to carry a mark your whole life and never be allowed to see it. The storm blew through until the 4th hour past midnight. When it finally quieted, I went to bed, and I slept 4 hours without dreaming, and when I woke the name was still in my chest where it had always been, and it was no longer a question. It was an answer. She was practical, was the thing. I had expected someone lost in the way of soft people who have wandered outside their territory, helpless, requiring constant reassurance, wanting to be entertained. Sella was not that. By the second morning, she had assessed the keep's condition with the quiet thoroughness of a woman accustomed to reading situations, found the library, and asked Aldrich whether there was work she might do to repay the hospitality while the road remained impassable. Aldrich, who is not easily impressed, came to find me with an expression I had not seen on him before. "She has already found 4 errors in the guest room supply ledger," he said. "How?" She was looking at the shelf inventory while she waited for her tea. "I went to find her. She was in the library, the East Wing Library, the one that holds the pack lineage records for the whole of the Northern Territories, which my family had maintained for 4 generations. She had not asked permission to be there. She had found it the way water finds a low place, drawn by the kind of instinct that comes from spending a life among records. She was standing at the long reading table with 3 volumes open and a small piece of her own paper. She had evidently brought her own paper. Of course she had, making notes in a hand so small and precise it was almost a different language. She looked up when I came in. "I hope this is acceptable," she said, without particular anxiety. "I didn't touch anything I wasn't certain was meant to be handled. There are 2 lineage entries in the Coldmere branch register that appear to be duplicated, the same birth date, 2 different recorded names. It may be a scribal error from the original copy. I wasn't sure if you were aware." I looked at the page she indicated. She was right. The entries had sat there unchallenged for at least 60 years. "How did you see that?" I asked. "I read quickly," she said, "and I have a good memory for patterns. Duplicated entries usually mean a record was transcribed twice from different sources and the discrepancy was never reconciled." She paused. "I'm sorry if I've overstepped." "You haven't," I said, and pulled up the chair across the table and sat down. She looked at me for a moment, that same direct, assessing look she had given me at the gate. Not challenging, just honest. The look of someone who does not see the point of pretending not to see what she sees. "How long have you kept records?" I asked. "Since I was 9, she said. "My uncle, my guardian, arranged it when it became clear I had the aptitude. He contracts my services to various packs. It is useful work." A pause, so small most people would not have caught it. "He says it suits me." "He says, not I find." There was an entire story in that distinction, and she had given it to me without meaning to, and I thought she knew it the moment it left her mouth, because she returned to the page and did not look up again for a moment. I stayed in the library for 2 hours that morning. We worked in a comfortable silence, the kind that takes most people years to build with another person. She asked me questions about the lineage entries when she needed context, precise, professional questions, the kind that showed she was not curious about the politics behind the records, only about the accuracy of the records themselves. I answered. I asked her about the annotation system she used on her own paper, and she explained it with the slightly startled pleasure of someone who has been doing a thing alone for a long time and is not accustomed to anyone asking. My wolf sat in my chest like a banked fire, still and warm and entirely certain. She had not asked about the arch. I had expected her to ask most people, told that the blood seal above the gate had lit gold at their arrival, would have asked a great many questions. She had either not been told or she had chosen not to ask. I suspected the latter. She had the patience of someone who waits until she understands a thing fully before she speaks about it. I did not tell her either, not yet. The road remained impassable for 9 days. Later, I would think about those 9 days the way you think about a season that changed the shape of your life, aware of how ordinary each one was, how each one looked exactly like the previous, and how completely each one altered the ground beneath you. She worked in the library. I found myself in the library. She sat across the table from me and I sat across the table from her and we worked, and sometimes we talked, and sometimes we did not, and the silence between us was never uncomfortable. She had a way of being present in a room that was not demanding, not quiet in the way of someone suppressing herself, but quiet in the way of someone who is entirely her own, who does not need you to notice her but does not shrink when you do. On the third morning she came to breakfast with a question about the Eastern Branch lineage structure, not a social question, a working question, precise and clear, and I answered it, and she made a note, and then she said without looking up, "You have a good memory for genealogy." "It is a useful thing to have, running a kingdom that is built on pack lineage," I said. "Yes," she made another note. "My uncle always said that records keeping was about memory first and notation second. Memory for what you have seen, notation for what you might not be there to remember for someone else." A pause. "I always thought it was the other way. The notation is the thing that survives you." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things, and went back to the lineage volume. I sat with that for a moment, the quiet logic of it, the shape of a mind that had spent its whole life thinking about permanence, about what outlasts, about the record that stays when the remembering person is gone. She ate with the household staff, and did not ask to eat with me. When Aldrich told me this, I said nothing, and then I told him she was to be offered the hall table if she wished it, and she appeared at dinner the following night without ceremony, and sat 2 seats down from me, and spoke to Aldrich about the Eastern ledger discrepancy they had apparently been discussing separately, and I listened to them talk and felt something in my chest that I could only call warmth, and it was not a feeling I was accustomed to associating with my own great hall. The hall had been a working room for 12 years, used for council sessions and accounts reviews, and the occasional formal dinner that the senior staff required of me. I had not thought of it as a place where people simply sat and talked with an ease that made the room feel larger. I thought about it that evening, after she had gone back to the guest wing, and realized I had been watching the fire in the hearth and not wanting the meal to end, which was not a thing I had felt about a meal in a long time. The wolves of the inner yard found her on the 4th day. I have 8 great wolves that run the inner yard, old animals, trained since pups for the keep, not given to friendliness with strangers. 3 of them are large enough to knock a grown man flat without meaning to. She came out of the east door one morning and they were there, and she stopped, and they looked at each other, and then Gramer, the oldest, who has not been interested in anyone's attention in 6 years, walked forward and put his head under her hand. I watched from the upper courtyard walk. I don't know how long I stood there. She did not make a fuss of it. She did not exclaim or make the kind of delighted noise that tends to annoy old wolves. She just rested her hand on his head and let him stand there, and after a moment she sat down on the step, heedless of the cold, heedless of her borrowed dress, and 2 of the younger wolves came and sat with her, and she let them. I thought about the packs she had worked in. Pack records keepers travel between packs, deal with pack leadership, observe ceremonies and rites. They are present for the formal life of a pack, but not part of it, not truly, not in the way that matters. They see the wolves. They do not, as a rule, sit on cold stone steps and let the wolves make up their own minds about them. The wolves of every pack she had worked with had apparently made up their minds the same way Gramer had. She was worth sitting with. She was worth choosing. That evening at dinner she mentioned it to Aldrich. "The gray one," she said. "Gramer, I think one of the guards called him. He seems to have been grieving something." Aldrich looked at me over her head. I said, "His keeper died last year." She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "He was leaning into my hand rather than putting his weight on me," she said. "There is a difference. He wanted contact, not to be absorbed." She paused. "I hope I didn't overstep by sitting with them." "You did not," I said. She returned to her bread and her conversation with Aldrich, and I looked down at my plate and thought about a woman who could identify the grief of an old wolf by the precise angle of his lean, who did not overstep but sat on a cold stone step without minding it, who had been contracted out since age 9 to packs who found her useful without once entering her into a mating rite. "He says it suits me." On the 5th day, she found that 3 of the lineage volumes had been rebound incorrectly, sections from different decades interleaved without notation, and spent the morning creating an index that had never existed, working with the focused pleasure of someone who loves the specific labor of putting a disordered thing back into sense. I brought her tea mid-morning and set it beside her without comment, and she said, without looking up, "Thank you," and kept working. And I stood in the library doorway for a moment longer than I needed to, and then found something elsewhere to attend to. On the 6th day, I asked her, carefully, whether she had found a match at any of the ceremonies in the packs she worked with. She was quiet for a moment. We were in the library, and she was making a note, and she finished the note before she answered, which I understood to be the way she did things when something required care. "My uncle felt it would create complications with the work," she said. "If I were matched to a pack, my services would become the property of that pack. He preferred the flexibility." A pause. "He is not wrong that it is a reasonable arrangement." She said it the way you say something you have said to yourself a great many times, and have long since finished arguing with. I did not say what I wanted to say, which was, "He is very wrong, and he has wasted 12 years of your life keeping you invisible because it was profitable for him." I did not say it because she had not asked for my opinion of her uncle, and because the anger I felt on her behalf was mine to manage, not hers to receive without warning. I said, "How old are you?" 31, she said. 31, and the linen wrappings had been on her wrist since birth. She had been told it was a birth scar. She had never been entered into a mating rite. She had been contracted and recontracted and moved from pack to pack, and the mark on her wrist had sat there under the linen, covered and unnamed and waiting, while I sat in a sealed kingdom with a name in my chest that I could not place. I excused myself from the library that afternoon. I walked the inner walls until the cold was enough to quiet the thing building behind my ribs. The 7th day I spent at the wall entirely, reviewing the outrider reports with the thoroughness of a man who needs to be useful. The road remained impassable. The snow had come again in the night, not a storm this time but a steady deep fall, the kind that settles into everything and requires days to shift. I read every report twice, and then I went to the library in the evening, and she was there, reading by the lamp, and she looked up when I came in, and there was something in her face, just for a moment before she composed it, that looked like relief. Like a person who had not quite admitted to themselves that they were waiting for something, and had just received it. I sat down across from her and picked up the volume I had left there the previous day, and we worked until the fire needed tending, and one of us tended it, I am no longer sure which, and then we worked until the lamps had gone low, and eventually she said good night and went to her room, and I sat in the library for a while after she left, in the comfortable, particular quiet of a room where someone has been who you did not want to leave. On the 8th day, she found the lineage entry. It was in the oldest volume in the library, the founding records of Ironmere, 300 years back, written in my great-great-grandfather's hand. She had been working her way through them with the meticulous patience I had come to recognize as entirely natural to her, not assigned to her, and she had found it toward the back of the 2nd volume, the record of the Blood Seals Commission, and below it, in a different hand, an annotation in faded ink. She came to find me in the East Hall, which was where I was reviewing the supply line rerouting for the 4th time that week, which was a pretense because I had finished it on the 2nd try, and was simply finding reasons to stay near the East Hall, which adjoined the library corridor. She said, without preamble, "I found something in the founding records that I think you should see." I followed her back. She showed me the page. The annotation was not long. Roughly translated from the old Northern script, she had managed the translation herself, which meant she read the old script, which meant she was more educated than any pack recorder had any practical reason to be. It read, "The arch will know her by the mark she carries, which is the mirror of his. When she crosses the threshold, the seal will light, for the mark does not sleep at the gate. She need not know it is there. She need not know what it means. The gate knows what she does not. I was aware of her watching me as I read it. I looked up. She was looking at me with the direct, patient look, the one that waited for things to become clear before speaking. And then she looked down at her left wrist, at the linen wrappings, and back up at me. "The arch lit gold when I arrived," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes," I said. "Aldrich told me this morning," she said. "I asked him directly. He had been careful about it, which is how I knew there was something to ask about." A pause. "I have worn these wrappings since I was born. My uncle told me they were for a scar." Another pause, so small I almost missed it. "I have never taken them off." The room was very still. The fire in the East Hall hearth was the only sound. I said, "You don't have to." She looked at me for a long moment. There was something in her face I had not seen there before, not fear, and not uncertainty exactly, but the look of someone standing at the edge of a thing they have been approaching for a very long time without quite knowing it. The look of someone who has been a records keeper for 22 years and has just found the one record she was never allowed to look at. "I know," she said. "She did not take them off that night. That was her right. I did not ask her to." Her uncle arrived on the morning of the 9th day. I knew he was coming before Aldrich told me. The road out of the Ashencrown Pass had opened the previous afternoon. I had been informed immediately, as I always was, and I had known that someone would come. The storm had passed. The road was clear. She had a contract and a guardian and a life that stretched back south from here like a rope she had not chosen but had not yet broken. He came with 2 horses and a cart and a letter of identification, and he was precisely the kind of man I had expected from everything I knew of him. Not cruel exactly. Small. The kind of smallness that calculates everything, who is useful, who is decorative, who can be maintained. He assessed Ironmere's gate with the reflexive estimation of a man counting assets, and he smiled at my gate captain with the particular warmth of someone who has learned to be pleasant to people who are larger than him. He asked for his niece. He was brought to the main hall. I was already there. She was there too. She had been told he had come, and she had come to the hall, and she was standing to one side of the room with her hands at her sides and her face composed in the careful, neutral way I had come to understand, was what she wore when she was being very careful about what she showed. The ink was still on her fingers. The linen was still on her wrist. Her uncle came in and said, warmly, the way he said everything, "There you are. I was worried sick. You gave us quite a fright, Sella, taking the wrong road, though I suppose these things happen. Have you been well treated? Are you ready? The audit in Coldhellow has waited long enough." She looked at him, and then she looked at me, and then she looked at her uncle again. I watched her think. I have watched people think for a long time, and I have learned to see the shape of it, the weighing, the measuring, the moment where the scale tips. I watched it happen in her face, quickly and then slowly, like ice giving way. She said, "Uncle, I would like to stay." His smile did not entirely vanish. It adjusted. "I beg your pardon." "I would like to stay at Ironmere," she said, "for now." "Sella," the warmth in his voice dropped a register, though he maintained the shape of it. "You have obligations. The Coldhellow audit can be completed by another recorder. You have 3 others contracted." She paused. "I am aware of the business, Uncle. I have kept its records." "This is not," he stopped. He looked at me for the first time with real attention, recalibrating. The way a man recalibrates when he realizes a conversation he thought he was winning has shifted beneath him. "My lord, I apologize for any disruption. My niece has been through an ordeal, and I think she is perhaps not entirely herself." "She seems entirely herself to me," I said. The hall was quiet. My household, Aldrich, the steward's assistant, 2 of the senior guard who had come in when the visitor was announced, were very still in the way of people who are watching something they will speak of for a long time. Her uncle tried again, a different angle. She is contracted. The contract stipulates. Show me the contract, I said. He had not brought it. I had known he would not have brought it. It was not the kind of document you carry when you are expecting a simple collection. He began to explain that it was at his office, that it could be retrieved, that the terms were quite clear. I said, a pack recorder in her 32nd year has the right to review and terminate any service contract. It is in the Northern Territorial Code. She would know this better than either of us. She did know it. I saw the small, precise moment when she understood that I had looked it up. She looked at me and I looked at her, and she looked back at her uncle. Send me the contract to review, she said. I will send you my response within the month. That was all. Her uncle stood very still, and then he adjusted again and smiled again with less warmth than before and more caution. He said he understood. He said he hoped she was well. He said the door was always open. He left. The hall was quiet for a moment after the sound of his horses had gone. Aldrich cleared his throat. Perhaps, I said to the hall at large, everyone might find something to do elsewhere. They found it. I walked toward her. She was still standing in the same place, hands at her sides, linen-wrapped wrist visible below the edge of her sleeve. She watched me come toward her. She did not back up. I said, you do not have to stay. What I said, the territorial code, that was yours to use however you chose. If you want to go south and review that contract and terminate it somewhere else, that is yours. I will not hold you here. She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes gray, the exact gray of the stone in the east wall that holds the warmth, were very clear. I know you won't hold me, she said. That is part of why I said I wanted to stay. 12 years. A name spoken in the dark, in my wolf's voice, every winter, every long cold night in this keep where I had closed the gates and kept the territory safe and told myself that the kingdom was enough, that the work was enough, that a king who had not found his fated mate was still a king, and the wanting was a private thing and it would pass. It had not passed. I said, Sella, the blood seal read you when you crossed the gate. It has not done that in 300 years. It was built to read one thing, the mark carried by the Lycan king's fated mate. She did not flinch. She did not look away. I know, she said quietly. You've known since Aldrich told you about the arch, I said. You went and found the founding records yourself. You found the annotation. Yes. How long have you known there was something under the linen? A pause, not known, she said, wondered. The linen was always warm, more than fabric should be. I thought it was my imagination. She looked down at her left wrist. I thought about taking it off sometimes. My uncle was always very, very clear that I shouldn't, that the scar was sensitive, that the air would irritate it. Another pause. He has always been very careful about what I know. I looked at her wrist, at the worn double knot. May I show you something? I asked. She looked up. I held out my own left wrist. Below the edge of my sleeve, I pulled it back. The mark was there. It had been there since my 21st year, appearing the night I first heard the name. The Lycan king's mate mark, a fine silver trace like frost laid in branches across the inside of the wrist, waiting for its mirror. She looked at it for a long time. I watched her face. She was not afraid. She was the way she was with the old wolf, in the courtyard, still and present, and more moved than she was showing, in the way of someone who has learned that moving visibly costs you things. She looked up at me. I would like to see if they match, she said. When you are ready, I said, not before. She undid the knot herself. Slowly, the way you do something you have not done before and are not entirely certain of, but are doing anyway because you have decided to. She unwound the linen in careful loops and it came away, and we both looked at her wrist. The mark was silver gold, the same frost branch pattern as mine. A mirror, as the old record had said, not identical, but answering, the way two halves of a broken thing answer each other when they are brought back together. It had been there all her life, under the linen, waiting with the patience of a thing that is not in a hurry because it knows how the story ends. The moment the air touched it, it lit. Not a blaze, not the gold column of the arch, not a dramatic thing. A warm, silver light, quiet and certain, the way a fire comes up when you finally give it enough air. It lit, and my own wrist lit in answer, and the warmth that moved through me was not the heat of a thing happening. It was the warmth of a thing that had always been true, finally becoming visible. She looked at her own wrist with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not awe, exactly. Not surprise. The expression of someone who has been keeping records for 22 years, who has spent her life reading other people's lineage and bloodline and belonging, who has never had a document that said she herself belonged anywhere and has just found it. She said, "It's been there the whole time." "Yes," I said. Under the linen. A pause. He knew my uncle, he knew what it was. "I think he suspected," I said. "I think he knew that if a pack recorder carried the Lycan King's mate mark, she would not stay a pack recorder for long, and he preferred the flexibility." She absorbed this. The mark was still lit, a gentle silver on her wrist, and she turned her hand over and looked at it, and then she looked at mine. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For taking 12 years to come through your gate." I felt something shift in my chest. Not the wolf's quiet settling which had been there since she arrived, but something that was mine, the man's version of it. Something that had been braced for a long time, something held carefully against potential loss, opening without his permission. "You came the right way," I said, "even if it was the wrong road." She looked at me, and the smallest possible smile, careful and real, not the performance of warmth but the thing itself, crossed her face. It was the first time I had seen it fully, and I understood in that moment that there would be nothing quite like it, that I had been a king for 12 years in a sealed kingdom, and I had managed well enough and the work had been sufficient, and none of it had been quite like this. We stood in the East Hall for a while longer, both of us looking at the marks on our wrists in the firelight, which had deepened now into something that was less a light and more a warmth, a physical thing, low and even, like a hearth fire that has burned to its best coals. She turned her arm one way, and then the other slowly, the way you examine something that is yours for the first time and want to know all its angles. "I always thought it was warm under the linen," she said finally. "I told you that. I thought it was my imagination." "It wasn't," I said. "No," she lowered her arm, she looked at me. "Do you know I have spent 22 years recording the fated bonds of other people, the ceremonies, the claiming dates, the mate marks described in the formal notation, a silver trace on the left wrist, first appearing in the year of the bond." She paused. "I have written that notation perhaps 400 times." "And never once for yourself," I said. "And never once for myself." She looked at the mark again. "I am going to have to add an entry." Something that was warm and full moved through me. "I'll pull the correct volume," I said. She laughed, a small, real laugh surprised out of her, the first I had heard from her. It was very like her, quiet, precise, not excessive. The laugh of someone who does not waste anything, including laughter, but who is genuinely amused when something earns it. She had been carrying a mark under linen for 31 years, and she had come through a storm on a wrong road in a broken carriage. And the first thing she thought to do, standing in a firelit hall with the bond lit on her wrist, was note that there was a record to update. There are things I must tell you, because they matter to how it ended. The court convened 3 days later, not because I summoned them, but because courts are what they are. They fill with opinion the way a room fills with smoke. Word had traveled. A woman had arrived at Ironmere's gate and the blood seal had lit gold, and the Lycan King had not sent her south when the road opened. My senior council, 5 men, 3 of whom had opinions about everything and 2 of whom kept them largely to themselves, appeared in the great hall on the 3rd morning and asked to speak with me. I let them speak. The opinions were what I expected. She was an unknown. She had no pack standing, a pack records keeper, contracted, without formal affiliation, without title, without the social architecture that a match of this importance was supposed to have behind it. The mate mark was compelling, they agreed, but there were questions about whether the seal reaction might be read differently. Whether. I said, she is the one the seal read. My lord, the record is 300 years old, and the circumstances. I know the circumstances, I said. I have known the circumstances for 12 years. Every winter my wolf spoke a name and I did not know whose it was. I know whose it is now. The discussion is over. They were not pleased. They were also not foolish enough to say so directly. What they did not say directly, they found other ways to say, the kind of sustained, careful qualification that men of standing have practiced for centuries as a method of expressing disagreement without incurring consequence. Over the following days, certain members of the household staff behaved with a subtle coolness toward Sella that I noticed, and that she, I believe, noticed too, though she did not mention it to me. She went about her work in the library with perfect equanimity. She ate at the hall table and spoke to Aldrich and spoke to the gate captain's wife, who had brought her extra candles one evening and stayed for an hour of conversation, and the gate captain's wife had not, subsequently, been cool toward her at all. The household sorted itself out before the council did. That seemed right to me. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that when it happened, when I spoke her name formally in the great hall, with the full court present, it was not an impulse. It was not a man carried away by a beautiful woman and a glowing mark. It was a Lycan king, 12 years into a sealed kingdom, who had been waiting without knowing it, and who had looked at the evidence with the thoroughness of a man trained to read exactly this kind of evidence, and who had made a decision. And because I had made the decision, I wanted it to be made the right way. I told Sella what I intended to do. I told her before I did it. I sat across the library table from her. She had returned to the lineage records, not because she had been asked to, but because the errors bothered her, and I told her that I wanted to speak her name formally before the court, and that I needed her to know what it would mean, and that I needed her to say whether she wanted me to. She looked at me for a long time. What would it mean? She asked, not fearful. Asking because she wanted to understand, as she always did. It would mean I am naming you as the one the seal chose, I said. It would mean that in the eyes of this court and this kingdom you are my fated mate, not an obligation, not a contract, something you would have the right to accept or refuse. I paused. I am asking, Sella, not announcing. She thought about it in the way she thought about things that mattered, carefully, with real attention, not reaching for an answer until she had the question fully in her hands. The council won't like it, she said. No, I agreed. Some of the household staff have been. I have noticed some distance. I have noticed it too, I said. It will resolve. She looked at me. How can you be sure? Because it always does when a Lycan king has made a clear and settled decision, I said. Ironmere is not a court that runs on faction and whisper. It runs on clarity. I have not given it clarity yet. That is what the formal naming is. She was quiet for a moment. I could see her thinking, not anxious thinking, working thinking, the kind she did when she was trying to get the shape of a thing exactly right before she said it. You have been alone in this kingdom for 12 years, she said finally. You closed the gates and kept your people safe, and you ran everything properly, and you have done it all without a partner. A pause. I am not going to be a disruption to that, to Ironmere. I want you to understand that before you do this. I am not a disruption. I am very good at making things run correctly. Something in my chest did something that was not quite pain and not quite laughter. I know, I said. I have been making things run correctly for other packs for 22 years, she said. I would like, if possible, to do it for one that is actually mine. Then she said, yes, I want you to. The great hall of Ironmere holds perhaps 200 people when it is fully assembled. The morning I convened it, it held close to that word moves in a closed kingdom, moves faster than it does in open ones. And by the time the senior council had taken their places and the household had filed in, the hall was full. Sella stood to one side of the hearth. She was wearing a dress that Aldrich's wife had brought her, dark blue, good wool, nothing elaborate, which she had chosen deliberately from the several options offered, because she was not a woman who needed to be elaborate to be seen. Her hair was back. The linen wrappings were gone. Her left wrist was bare, and the mark was there, silver and faint in the hall's morning light. I was standing at the center of the hall, which is where a Lycan king stands when he is speaking for the record. I spoke her name, her full name, which she had given me on the second day in the library, in the careful exchange of first formal address between someone who keeps records and someone who needs to know how to refer to you. Sella Donran, Pack Records Keeper. Daughter of a lineage that the founding archive of Ironmere I had found this, had spent the seventh night going back through the old volumes while she slept, a distant thread of connection to the northern bloodline. Not a grand hidden princess, not a lost heir of royal blood, just a thread, old and thin, enough to explain why the seal had read her mark at all. She was no one's grand secret. She was simply the woman the seal had waited 300 years to meet, quietly going her way through other people's lineage records while her own sat unread under a double knot. I said her name, and I said what the seal had shown, and I said that she was the one the blood seal of Ironmere had named, and that I was naming her in kind, as the Lycan king's fated mate, before this court and this household and this keep. The hall was quiet. Not the quiet of resistance, the quiet of a room in which something true has been said, and the room is taking it in. I looked at her across the hall. She was looking back at me. Her hands were at her sides. Her left wrist, with the silver mark visible even from a distance, was turned slightly outward, not displayed, just open. The way she stood, the way she held herself, was the same as it had been at the gate the night she arrived. Composed, present, not frightened, fully herself. I crossed the hall toward her. It is not a short distance, the great hall of Ironmere. It was built for ceremony, and ceremony requires space. I walked the full length of it. Behind me, I heard the shift of 200 people adjusting in their seats, the particular quality of silence that contains held breath. I stopped in front of her. I held out my left wrist, the mark lit in silver against the candlelight. She raised her own, and the two marks, mirror and answer, root and branch, came into proximity, and the light that rose between them was quiet and warm and old, the way a thing is that has been waiting a long time and is in no hurry now that it has arrived. I said, "Sella Donran, will you be named?" She looked at me. "Yes," she said. "I will." Gramer, old Gramer, who had no business being in the great hall and who had gotten in through the south corridor, which means someone had left the door open, which means someone had known he would want to be there, walked to Sella's side and sat. She looked down at him. He leaned against her leg with the careful, precise lean of an animal who is not asking to be held, only asking to be near. She put her hand on his head. The senior council member who had the most opinions, an older man, Harriet, who had served my father and had spent the last 12 years managing his opinions of mine, stood from his seat. I watched him, and I think the room watched him, and then he bowed. Not a formal court bow, the kind that is half performance. A real bow, the kind that means you recognize something worth recognizing. The rest of the hall followed. Her uncle never came back for the contract. I heard later that he had sent a letter to her, not to me, releasing the contract terms with a great deal of cordial language about wishing her well. She showed it to me because she showed me everything she filed, which I was beginning to understand was her version of trust. You are allowed to read what I have. She read it once, carefully, and put it in the archive, and never mentioned him again. Cold Hello got their audit eventually. She arranged it herself, sent a letter recommending a records keeper she had trained briefly in Fenward, who she thought would do the work justice. It was exactly the kind of thing she would do. There are small things I remember, and I find I return to them more than to the formal moments. I remember the morning she brought the Founding Records volume to the breakfast table, not the great hall table, just the small table in the east alcove, the one I use when I do not need the formality of the hall, and read out the annotation aloud to hear how it sounded in the air rather than just on the page, the way writers sometimes do when they are trying to understand a thing through their ears rather than their eyes. She read, "The gate knows what she does not." She looked up at me over the book. There was a quality in her face that was rare and fine, a kind of peace, not the peace of someone who has been told everything is all right, but the peace of someone who has, after a long time, arrived at a truth they can verify for themselves, and has verified it and found it holds. I remember the first evening she sat on the upper wall walk with me, which is where I go to read the weather and look at the territory, and which I had never shared with anyone, and she brought a small notebook and sat at the other end and wrote, and we did not speak for an hour, and when we came back inside I realized I had not once felt the silence as an absence. I remember the exact quality of her voice, the first time she said my name, Kedron, not my title, not my lord, just the name in the library, asking me a question about a lineage branch, and how my wolf received it the way a great door receives a key, with the whole ease of a thing that was built precisely for this. The mark on her wrist, freed of its linen at last, was a warm silver in the cold light of Ironmere's long winters. Sometimes she would look at it in a particular way, not vain, not even pleased exactly, just thoughtful, and I understood that she was still learning what it meant to have a document that said she belonged. She had been a records keeper for 22 years. She knew better than anyone what it meant for a lineage entry to be complete. She is my fated mate, and she found us both in the place records go when they have been kept carefully and honestly for a very long time. The truth. I think about the storm sometimes, the collapsed road, the wrong fork, the carriage wheel that shattered in the snow and sent her to a gate she was never meant to find, in a kingdom that had been sealed for 12 years, where a wolf had been calling her name in the dark. The gate knows what she does not. She came by accident. She came by every accident that needed to happen, in the right order, at the right moment, in the only winter when the road was bad enough and the storm was large enough, and her driver was inexperienced enough to take the wrong fork. I had closed those gates to protect my kingdom. I had been right to. I had not known they were also keeping a space open for her. She found the error in the Founding Records the same way she found errors in every ledger she was ever handed, not because she was looking for anything specific, but because she paid careful attention to every line, and careful attention to every line is how you find the things that have been sitting there, unreconciled, for 300 years, waiting for someone with the patience to read them. She is the most patient woman I have ever known. She has the patience of someone who has spent 22 years making herself useful and invisible, who has been told her whole life that she was the records and not the record, not the story but the keeper of other people's stories. It is not that patience anymore. It is a different kind. The patience of someone who has found the one document that names her and is reading it carefully with full attention because it is hers and she is not in a hurry. There is a thing she does in the evenings now. She brings a small lamp to the east alcove table and sits with whatever she is working on, the Founding Records, a correspondence she is drafting for me, occasionally a record of her own that I have never asked her about and have never been invited to read, which I respect, because a woman who has kept other people's records for 22 years is allowed to have one she keeps for herself. And she works and I work, and the room holds us both without requiring anything particular from either of us, and when the fire needs tending we take turns, and when one of us wants tea we ask if the other does too, and the evenings pass, and they are the best hours of my day in a way that I find extremely difficult to put into words for a man who has spent 12 years governing a kingdom alone, and priding himself on the precision of his administration. I have run Ironmere well. I believe that honestly, I have run it well, and I have kept my people safe, and the borders have held and the supply lines work and the records are accurate, or they were as accurate as they were before she started finding the errors in them. What I had not known, running it well and alone, was the particular quality of a life that has someone in it who is as interested in accuracy as you are, who notices the same things you notice, who will sit in your library in the cold hours of a winter evening and care about the same things you care about, not because they have been asked to, not because it is required of them, but because it is simply what they are. I had sealed a kingdom and called it enough. I had not known what enough could mean. On the night the mate mark fully settled, 3 weeks after she had taken the linen off, when the silver trace had deepened into the warmth that means the bond has rooted, she was sitting across from me at the small East Alcove table, writing something in that precise hand of hers, and she looked up and said, "I want to audit the Ironmere founding records properly. All 5 volumes. There are probably 20 more errors like the ones I found." I said, "That will take months." "Yes," she said, "I know." She smiled at me then, the real smile, the one I had seen for the first time in the main hall after her uncle left, and had been learning the particulars of every day since, not the performance of warmth, the thing itself. "I suppose," she said, "that I had better stay."